JICA lecture series of Japanese development experience to date, in line with the JICA Global Agenda, Cooperation Strategies by Development Issues. Social Security and Modernization in Japan.
Social security is now an essential part of health and stability of people's lives in Japan. After its development in the process of modernization, including the attainment of universal health insurance and pension insurance coverage at the early stage of its high economic growth. In this video, I want to share two key messages. The first is that Japan designed its social security in the process of modernization, not as a copy of Western European social security, but in the context of Japan. The second message is that Japan's universal social security programs established at the early stage of its high economic growth resulted in a wide sharing of the gains from the economic growth among citizens, and support further growth through the formation of majority middle-class population. I will elaborate on these messages by tracing the history of Social Security in Japan. But before that, I would like to explain the scope of Social Security covered in this video. Social Security is a system that provides benefits under the government's responsibility to guarantee a healthy and secure life for the people when the stability of people's life is impaired. Social security programs include social insurance-based and tax-based pensions, health benefits programs, unemployment and labor accident compensation programs, protection of the poor population and vulnerable children, child rearing services, and care for children and adults with disabilities, as well as older adults. This video focuses primarily on health insurance and pension, the protection of the poor population, and care services for older adults. People are involved in Social Security throughout their lives as the recipients of benefits and the supporters of Social Security programs by paying insurance premiums and taxes. The modern Social Security system was first created in Germany in the latter half of the 19th century. Under the Imperial Chancellor Bismarck, it started with the sickness insurance law in 1883, followed by industrial accident compensation law and the old age and invalidity insurance law. They were in response to labor problems and labor movements, which were becoming more serious with the development of industrial capitalism. France and the United Kingdom followed Germany in developing social security programs, such as workers' accident compensation and medical insurance, from the end of the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century. Japan was also a part of these movements. In Japan, industrialization progressed rapidly from the end of the 19th century after the Meiji Restoration. At the same time, labor disputes over poor working environments arose. In such circumstances, movements to protect workers began in large private and state-owned factories, which led to the national government's development of social security system. Shortly after the beginning of the 20th century, mutual aid associations were gradually formed in large-scale private and state-owned factories. Those workplace-based associations provided benefits in case of illness and death of workers, and pension benefits for retirement and disability funded by the contributions from employers and employees. The government began protecting factory workers through factory law in 1911, stipulating the responsibility of business owners for the work-related injuries and deaths of their factory workers. The First World War in 1910s brought a boom to Japan. But after the war, a severe recession hit. Faced with frequent labor disputes calling for wage increases and opposition to dismissal, the government gradually engaged in Social Security to alleviate labor conflicts and curb social unrest. Japan's first modern Social Security program was a factory workers' social health insurance established in 1922, followed by the National Health Insurance Program for farmers and self-employed people in 1938, and social health insurance for employees, families, and white-collar workers in 1939. To increase the labor force during World War II, the government started a pension program for male factory workers in 1941. In 1944, it was expanded to female workers and office workers. During this modernization period, Japan established its social security system mainly by social insurance-based programs like in Western European countries. However, it was not a copy of Western Europe. The government designed the social security programs in the context of Japan. That is especially noticeable in health insurance programs as shown in the 2 points. The first point is that the government was actively involved in the operation of social security programs. The government itself became the insurer for the employees of small and medium-sized enterprises, while the insurers for big company workers were workplace-based associations, as in Western countries. The background to this choice was the lack of experience in operating an insurance program by workplace-based organizations in Japan. The second point is that there was a proactive coverage for farmers. Since the late 1920s, rural areas had been exhausted due to recessions and bad harvests. A large part of the debt of poor farmers was medical expenses, and the government created a health insurance program to break the chain of poverty and illness in rural area. It was an insurance based on the human connection of the community, not a profession. And the insurer was an organization created by the people of the community. It was a unique idea not found in Western countries at the time. The background was a strong sense of community in rural Japan. It was not uncommon in Japan's rural areas before modernization that villagers financed other troubled villagers. Some communities had a mechanism for hiring doctors with the collected rice from villagers. In 1943, 5 years after enactment, this new social health insurance program became available in 95% of all municipalities nationwide. One of the factors for this widespread acceptance was the new program's alignment with the context of Japan. In addition to the government's aggressive promotion measures with an aim of improving the physical strength of people under the wartime regime. Due to World War II, Japan's per capita GNP fell to about 60% of the mid-1930s, and 1/4 of tangible assets, such as factory equipment, buildings, furniture, and household goods, were lost. The most serious social problems were unemployment, inflation, and poverty. And post-war Social Security began with poverty alleviation. The Public Assistance Act of 1946 created a unified public assistance program. In the same year, the new constitution was promulgated with the provision that all people shall have the rights to maintain the minimum standards of wholesome and cultured living. In 1947, the unemployment insurance program was established. In the same year, the workers' accident compensation insurance was created by separating the labor accident benefits from social health insurance and pension insurance. Children who had lost their parents due to conflicts and those disabled in the war were also urgent issues. The Child Welfare Act and the Welfare Act for persons with physical impairments were enacted in 1948 and 1949, respectively. The war also severely damaged social health insurance and pension insurance programs. Due to the social and economic turmoil after the war, many insurers suspended or abolished health insurance programs. The number of insured persons halved in 2 years after the war. As for pensions, the rapid inflation made it difficult for workers to live. The burden of insurance premiums became difficult, and the value of reserves decreased. These movements indicate that the social security system is closely linked to socio-economic conditions and that it is necessary to address the challenges of the time. In the mid-1950s, Japan moved away from the post-war turmoil and entered the process of economic growth. On the other hand, even in 1956, 32% of the total population was not covered by social health insurance programs, and medical expenses were a major cause of poverty. Self-employed people, farmers, and employees of micro-business establishments did not have a pension program. Pension programs covered only about 1/3 of the working population. During that time, attaining this universal coverage of social health insurance and pension insurance became a political agenda. There was overwhelming support for social health insurance. The population was gradually aging, and nuclear families were increasing. The ruling party needed a political goal to gain people's support. The government prioritized an enhancement of Social Security along with the economic growth in its 5-year Economic Independence Plan in 1955. In 1961, Japan attained universal coverage of social health insurance and pension insurance programs. At that time, Japan's GDP per capita was only 1/6 of the United States. Attaining universal social security programs in the early stage of economic growth led to the widespread distribution of the gains from subsequent growth. At the same time, it supported further economic growth by forming a majority middle class. The characteristics of the social security system during this period are as follows. First, health services under social health insurance programs were equal across the different parts of the population. All citizens were covered. They had access to almost all medical institutions, and the service package was basically the same for everyone, whether they were employees, self-employed, or farmers. Moreover, the government decided the prices of medical services and drugs, and the same price list was applied nationwide. Second, the government enhanced the social security benefits throughout the high economic growth period. Japan achieved unprecedented high growth in the 1960s, and the social insurance programs benefited from it. For the informal sector population, the patient's copayment rate, initially 50%, was lowered to 30% by 1967. the benefit package was expanded, such as the inclusion of dialysis in 1967. The pension benefit level significantly rose, reducing the burden of medical expenses, which was the primary cause of poverty among people, led to the formation of a majority middle class, coupled with an increase in income due to economic growth. Regarding care services, the Act on Social Welfare for the Elderly in 1963 stipulated services for older adults, such as nursing homes and visiting caregivers, focusing on the low-income populations. The background to this was the young generation's internal migration to urban areas, which meant more nuclear families. Third, with the achievement of universal health insurance, the focus of Japan's social security shifted from ex post relief to the poor to poverty prevention. The improved medical standards through social health insurance translated to a healthier workers' population and supported further economic growth. During the 1960s, social security benefits continued to expand, but the focus was on pension and social health insurance. On the other hand, the development of support services for children and adults with disabilities, care services for older adults, and child-rearing support services was limited. Behind this was the social and economic situation at that time. Social security programs at that time assumed a continuing economic growth, a large working-age population, and a household model with a working husband and a full-time housewife who was the main caregiver of family members in need of care. However, in the 1970s, these conditions drastically changed. Since the end of high economic growth triggered by the oil crisis in 1973, the aging of the population has progressed rapidly. The size of households has shrunk, and the number of double-income households has increased. Under these circumstances, the government has been implementing constant reforms to ensure sustainability of social security programs and to respond to growing needs such as long-term care for older adults. Japan's history of social security gives three significant implications for countries that are currently developing social security. The first is that it is crucial to design the system according to the context of your own country while referring to the examples of other countries. Just as Japan actively covered farmers with the social security system. The second is to consider an interaction between social security and the economic and fiscal issues. Japan experienced a virtuous cycle in 1960s by distributing the gains from growth widely to the people through a universal social security system, which supported further economic growth. The third is that it is imperative to reform social security in response to changes in the demographic structure and the social and economic conditions. Japan has been reforming its social security programs to raise sustainability and meet growing needs in response to aging, changes in household structure, and economic and fiscal conditions. It might be helpful to ask yourself, what context should be considered when designing and implementing social security in your country? How do social security and the economy and finance affect each other? What will happen to their demographic structure and economic and social conditions in the future? And how should social security respond? This is the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention.
Japan has modernized from a non-Western background to establish a free, democratic, prosperous, and peace-loving nation. In this sense, Japan is one of the best development models for developing countries and regions today. In addition, Japan has contributed to economic growth in many developing countries, especially in Asia. Therefore, we would like to share with you Japan's unique experiences of modernization, which is different from Western countries, and cooperation for developing countries through this video material. This video series provides a comprehensive summary by development issues according to the lineup of JICA's cooperation strategy, called the JICA Global Agenda.